In this episode, we're going to be talking about the trifecta of the Liberal government: housing, pipelines, and inflation, and how none of it seems to be going the way that the Liberals wanted to. Welcome back to the Canadian Shield. My name is Sterling. Premier Legault of Quebec has decided that a pipeline is not such a bad idea. Now that he's had a time to take a listen to all the people around him, and they realize that the job is what they would prefer rather than to virtue signal to people like Mark Carney that the carbon is coming down. And we're going to be discussing how this was a serious blow to the federal government. And I would have loved to have been in the room when Stephen Guilbeault heard the news. Then we'll talk about the disaster of the housing and how the Liberal government's plan is falling to pieces, and the ups and downs of the inflation, what's good for us and what isn't. Well, we'll begin with the pipeline breaking news. I think that now that it's said, it can't be unsaid, and I believe that that's going to cause Stephen Guilbeault to try to be tap dancing like, what is that expression, cat on a tin roof or a hot tin roof. I don't think that they can withstand it if Quebec decides that they want it. If Quebec says, you know what, we need both the money and the infrastructure, then they're going to have to do it. And that's good. That's good for the rest of Canada. And of course, Mark Carney will try to take credit for it, just like he did with all of Pierre Poilievre's ideas. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith believes the conversation around pipelines is shifting following recent comments by Quebec Premier François Legault sharing the openness to develop projects in his province. Legault made an appearance on the podcast Contact, hosted by Stéphane Bureau last week, and he said he senses a growing openness to potential pipeline projects among Quebecers. He even mentioned a potential project that would pass through the northern part of the province and end at the port of Sept-Îles. The project like this, which would have been unthinkable before Trump, Legault said. Again, you can't even... Unbelievable, the obsession that most of the left has with Donald Trump. I think that we need to set aside Donald Trump, forget all about Donald Trump, and just start looking after ourselves. Stop worrying about Ukraine. Stop worrying about anybody. Just start worrying about ourselves. We can't be looking after other people if we can't even look after our own people. We get real serious crises running around this country, and our prime minister, whether it be Trudeau or whether it be Carney, is floating around the world on a jet telling you that you have to do everything on a bicycle. So it's just not a good look from where I'm sitting.
Quebec's premier says there will be no public funding for a potential pipeline project in the province. He's clarifying his stance after saying that a pipeline is now more socially acceptable. A new poll also suggests Quebecers would be in favor of such a project. Our Franca Mignacca has been following the story from the National Assembly. Franca, what does the poll say?
Well, Andrea, Quebecers were asked whether they support the idea of a pipeline connecting Western Canada to the east, and 55% responded in favor, despite failures to get such a project off the ground in the past. While he's open to the idea of a pipeline, his government would not fund it. Just last week, he suggested that a pipeline in northern Quebec could be a solution to respond to U.S. tariffs, an idea welcomed by Alberta Premier Danielle Smith.
Well, now it turns out that many Quebecers are in favor of it, and the people are floating that they put it in Sept-Îles or in the northern part of the province to give jobs there. Now, I won't talk to that just yet. I just want to show you that last clip again. And I'm going to comment on a couple of things, and we're going to start right here where we can see the trench that's being dug by the specially designed machine and how it's going to go along probably the entire length of that pipe. And then those guys are going to come down, 7 or 10 of them, and just roll the pipe into the ground, and then they're going to bury it over, and then you can plant trees or grass or shrubs or put a park bench. Nobody will ever know the difference any more than you would know if you're sitting on top of a sewer line at your local park or if you got one running under the street out in front of you. Now, I'd like to just kind of point out to the amount of guys you got sitting there all making serious money, real money, right? Many of them are going to know how to weld. It's one of the biggest things in demand in the oil field, no matter which way you go. And if you really want to make money welding in the oil patch, learn how to scuba dive and weld. It's ridiculous money. It's seriously large amounts of money. You get paid by the inch. That's not for now. Now I just want to show you the amount of guys that are working right there. And you think, well, that's just a special patch. That's just like a funny shot. Nope, look, you got 10 or 15 guys right here too. I'll get it clearer for you now. Not to mention, as we watch all of the crane, all those crane operators all got at least one guy, maybe two, depending on where the spotters are. Here's the guys that are getting ready to, these are the, you see how he's wiping that down is probably because he's going to be fitting that inside of it, the next one coming, and then somebody will come along and weld it. And there's the overhead crane operator putting a length of pipe onto the truck driver. So it's, you know, you're laying one pipe, you're giving a lot of money to a lot of guys to put down, because it's not computer work, it's not programming, but it does require skills, and it does require standing out in the hot all day long, and it does require being able to operate heavy equipment. All of these jobs pay a lot of money just to do those jobs. That's outside of getting into the refinery or the transfer stations or any of that stuff. So yeah, it makes a lot of sense that he would want to put these jobs into northern Quebec. It makes a lot of sense that they would want to put these jobs anywhere along the line, because they pay people a lot of money, and they pay people a lot of money because it makes a lot of money.
The Leger poll also found the majority of Quebecers want the province to abolish its carbon pricing system. 56% feel they're paying too much at the pump. Since the federal carbon tax was abolished, Quebec has paid significantly higher prices for gas compared to the rest of the country. Quebec's current pricing system forces drivers to pay about an additional 10 cents per litre. But Environment Minister Benoit Charette says the current system is here to stay for now.
That's right, folks. You heard it here first. MAGA Canada has invaded Quebec, and they now want to axe the tax. Finally, common sense is reaching the province of Quebec, who is, as you've heard, paying 10 cents more than the rest of the country, at least bare minimum, for a tank of gas. And their government's saying, no, we're good with it. Because in Quebec, they love to tax you. That's the price you pay for socialism. That's the price you pay for Marxism. You have to pay for everything. You have to pay for his fancy suit. You have to pay for his private jet. You have to pay for his lunch. You have to pay for his everything, while he tells you that you need to give more, and more. And nothing changes. That's the worst part of Marxist governments. They leave the status quo because that's what's best for them, and they don't care how it works out for you. Obviously, because you're telling this guy who you elected that you want the carbon tax gone, and he's like, nah, it's okay. Before I move on, I just want to show you a couple of things that you might not be aware of. For example, the flight leaving from Fort McMurray, which has an international airport, and getting to Sept-Îles takes 16 hours. If you were to drive it, there's two ways to go. One through the Trans-Canada, it takes 49 hours, and it takes 50 hours if you want to drive through the United States of America. Otherwise, we don't really have a way to get there. So you can see how building these kinds of things and bringing infrastructure like a magnetic levitation along with it will unlock the country. Because we are driving from northern Alberta to northern Quebec, not even like deep north, just mid-north. And we got to go to the border with the United States of America to do it, or we got to take a 16-hour flight. This country has issues outside of just getting pipelines built, and we might as well be doing it all in one shot, so that we're not trying to chase our own tails like we have been doing now for the last, 10 years? As we move over into housing, of course, it's the same old problems, and this is why Pierre Poilievre's idea of getting the government out of the way is the only thing that's going to work, because anybody can take a look at the system and realize it's the government being in the way that's causing the problem. It's the idea that Canadians are all tied into the same 5 cities, that we have to spread out, and we have to spread out in a way that gives a better standard of living. You should see some of the stuff that they're trying to push onto people, and they wonder why nobody wants to buy it. You want $1.3 million for a 250 square foot house or whatever it may be, or in a condominium. I mean, that's a real amount of money for a tiny little shoebox of a house that you can never have a family in, that you can never grow, and that you will never be able to sell because you'll be locked into it at an absorbent amount of money to begin with. Why don't the government understand that why don't they recognize that we don't believe in their system of 15-minute city, of cramming everybody into the same, 7 square blocks while they run around in private jets and have, expansive mansions. Why don't they try to treat Canadians the way that Canadians are asking them when they gave them their vote, instead of saying, no, now that you've given us your vote, we're going to turn it into the Jekyll and Hyde situation. Unfortunately, Doug Ford doesn't have any idea how to solve the problem, so he's being told bad ideas. He thinks that the best way to solve this problem is to make regulations, because secretly he's just a liberal. He's, conservative in name only, and he feels the best way to solve any problem is by drafting more laws, right? And that's exactly why it's not going to function in Ontario, because you're going to have people now get in the way of drafting more laws because you're stepping on their toes and everybody's stepping on each other's toes. Best way to do it is to tell them all that don't have any authority, and that we're going to build the house wherever it is, and we're going to drop it down. We're going to sell it at a reasonable price. And the only thing that we expect from you, Doug Ford, is to try to figure out faster ways of mass transportation so people can travel like the GO train, so they can travel from their bedroom community into the town and then go home again in a reasonable amount of hours. I come back to my position on the magnetic levitation, but it should always begin with freight, because every successful train company and train network in the world always begins with freight. Turns out in Alberta, they got a little town who feels that the best way to do this is to tax people who don't live in their house all year round. And I wonder how that's going to settle on the boomers that elected Mark Carney, or those that voted for it, all of the people who spend 5-6 months a year, the snowbirds down in the United States. A recent court decision has cleared the way for Canmore next year to impose a new livability tax of 0.4% property tax surcharge for homes left unoccupied more than half a year. Mayor Sean Croston says the ruling is a big win for Canmore, but without addressing the root cause of Canmore's housing shortage. Too few new homes being built. This new tax is simply a costly distraction, and that's an article written by the Fraser Institute. Obviously, you can't tell people that you're gonna pay more for not living in your house. I mean, the absurdity of that. You got to pay to live in your house. You got to pay more if you're not living in your house. And then you wonder why nobody's building a house in Canmore. Well, it's an obvious reason, don't you think? It seems to me that City Hall is just, crazy with the taxes, and people don't want to live there. They don't want to live in those high, exorbitant amounts of taxes. And that's something that the government needs to come to grips with. That's something that you need to understand. These rising costs are what you have to address, and they start with the industrial carbon tax. As soon as you can start building a house cheaper for the amount of material you have to put in it, and never mind the GST, as soon as you can tell yourself that the lumber is half the cost because there's no industrial carbon tax, that the copper isn't half the cost because there's no industrial carbon tax, then you can start to build a house at a reasonable price. Then you can start to build a house in a piece of property instead of trying to cram it into a little Lego cubicle where everybody's stacked in on top of each other 6, 15, 20 stories. Of course, the problem is that the people who are elected to run the thing don't have any idea how to build anything. But the reality is that they're not problem solvers. They're paper pushers.
Metro Vancouver's condo market is in dire shape. A report last month finding more than 2,000 new completed condos are sitting unsold. That's in addition to regular listings. And pre-sales are so low, it's forcing some to rethink current projects.
We heard of one last week in Burnaby where the developer decided not to proceed with the project, and he, as a result, returned all the deposits.
It comes after the country's new housing minister and former Vancouver Mayor Gregor Robertson confirmed lowering prices would not be part of his policies.
We don't need to upset the apple cart with people's homes and assets and mortgages. I think we got to be careful to protect everyone who's got a home right now. Make sure that that's stable.
Sounds like just the guy to be solving this problem. The guy who thinks that what we already have, the status quo, should never be touched, should never be infringed upon. I'm sorry, but those people shouldn't have bought those houses at those high interest rates. They shouldn't have bought them at those prices. That's why people are not buying the condominiums now. That's why there's 3,000 of them in Toronto. There's 2,000 of them in Vancouver. And the ones in Toronto are going for nearly 100,000 less than what they started to ask for them when they were first being built. Because they're not built well, they're not comfortable, and they're not large. They're tiny little things because every developer is trying to make a gajillion dollars off one build instead of doing it the old-fashioned way, slowly but surely and properly. It's all about, let me get in, get my quick buck, and everybody can buy these like ridiculous condominiums. Nobody wants them anymore, especially when you have to factor in that a lot of people are working remotely. So you want to leave them in this tiny little 300 square foot apartment all day long where they got to work and they got to live. And I mean, nobody wants that. You can't have a child. You can't have a friend over. Nobody wants that. Obviously, that's why there's so many of them that you got. But also, it's not just that. It's the fact that they're overpriced. And this guy wants to leave them overpriced so that somebody who bought a house in 1970 hasn't lost any value. Probably himself, right? The idea that you would try to convince Canadians that it's worth $1 million. You should see some of these things. Even in that report right there, I kept a couple of stills because it's shocking to think about the way that they want you to live your life for millions of dollars. Remember, I got all these shots out of this report. So this is obviously Vancouver, or at least I'm going to think that by the way that they were implying. Now you can imagine just trying to buy something inside of that little cubicle. They're crammed in there so badly that if one person's electricity goes out, the whole building goes out. The parking is either going to be a lot of money or it's going to be underground. The body of blue bins that you see along the sidewalk indicates to me that you got to go pretty far to put your garbage out. There's no garbage chute in this building. You're paying millions of dollars and you got to walk, 2 blocks to put your garbage out, no matter the weather, no matter the time of day, any of that stuff. You got to go there on your way to the car. You got to go there, like all night long. And on top of all of that, you got to hear your neighbor snore. You got to hear them fight with the wife. You got to hear all of the things that are transpiring on around you. And you're paying, $2 million for this privilege. And you can't open your curtains because you're always going to be nervous that somebody around you is looking in your window and watching you, I don't know, whatever you do, right? Do your yoga or have a sleep or whatever it may be. Now, before I get to the really shocking development, let's have a look at this overly large neighborhood shot, right? So in the back there, we have condominium or townhouses going in as tight as you can fit them because the developer has ideas that he's going to put 1,000 of them in there. You can tell by where the roads are, and those little lots are where they're just going to cram in more and more townhouses. $2 million for this townhouse. You can see the people in the foreground had bought semi-detached or duplex homes. Their property value is tanking. And then one step further ahead is the original condominiums where everybody's just locked into these little the little 6-story, 55 units or whatever it may be. Not too many people living in there, but nonetheless, you're still looking at no parking. You're still looking at all kinds of problems to get your recycling done. You're looking at all kinds of problems to get your garbage taken out. You're looking at your neighbor looking in your window. You're looking at your neighbor spying on your every move. You got all kinds of concerns, and you're paying millions of dollars on top of enormous amounts of property tax. And you want people to buy these things and be happy about it. Imagine in your mind the amount of gall that takes. Now, they came along this, and I thought this has to be an artist's rendering or something. There's no way in the world that people are actually living this way. And you would be shocked to believe that that is an actual neighborhood. And in the background, you had the original ones where everybody's tacked in on top of one another. That's Mark Carney's dream, what we're looking at right here. This is the 15-minute city. And then you come into the ones where people get to buy a little bit more because this is where you're going to raise your kid, a 3-story apartment or a 3-story townhouse where you don't have a yard, or what yard you do have, you got to take turns going out into the backyard with the neighbor. There's no tanning back there unless you want to be, letting everybody see what's going on with your tanning. And the shocking part of it is they sent a drone down one of these little alleyways, and that's the shot they came up with. Now, what's really sad about this is only one side of the building gets a balcony, because the garage doors are there, so there's no front door. You have to park good luck if you don't own a car. If you're coming down here on a bicycle, you're going to open up the whole garage door, and then you can go into your house from inside of the garage, which is great if you're working nights and everybody's garage is open at 6 a.m, because that's going to make really, really quiet time, really quiet people sleep. And I really appreciate how on the one side it's people's kitchens, and on the other side it's the layout is people's bedrooms. that might be fine if you were paying 300 grand or something, if you were like in a position that that's the kind of thing you're putting up with until you get your life stabilized, or until you start to, have the ability to move into something better. But they want millions of dollars for these things. And who in their right, if you already have the millions and you're going to pay that outright, you're not going to buy this place. Otherwise, you're the person struggling for 25 years to get a down payment, and this is the best you're ever going to come up with. And you are wondering why nobody's buying them. I mean, let's just look forward a little bit instead of trying to convince ourselves that they'll take it or else. They've chosen or else. So you might have heard the shill media, the media that's owned by the Liberal government and gets the handouts from the taxpayers, claiming that inflation fell for April down to 1.7 and everybody hoorah, hoorah, hoorah. But that's not actually factual. It might be factual, but it doesn't actually represent the economy that's going on around us. This is right from Stats Canada. All links will be in the description. The Consumer Price Index, the CPI, rose to 1.7 year over year in April, down from 2.3% increase in March. Now, year over year means it's 1.7 from last April, and we're comparing it all of a sudden to last month, which is last March. They like to move them around on you. The slowdown in April was driven by lower energy prices, which fell 12.7% following a 0.3% decline in March, because he cut the carbon tax at the pump and your price fell 12%. Now that 12% should have translated to costs across the board. Of course it didn't, because he then took the same tax and threw it onto the businesses around you and started to charge a lot of extra tariffs on any of the products coming in. And so, as you can see in the next line, excluding energy, taking gas out of it, the CPI rose to 2.9% in April, following a 2.5% increase in March. So what we have here is almost 3%, and that's in April. Now, looking around, we can see that prices have gone up even further. So as I told you all, we're on our way to over 3% with that. I told you this like a couple of months ago, that we were coming up on 3%, because I can see where it's going. And I would imagine by the time they release the numbers again, we will probably be close to 5 somewhere. Mark Carney he doesn't have a grip on the economy, and it's getting away on us. And Donald Trump's economy is starting to really amp up. And so the industry is now moving. People are going down into the Americas with full speed ahead. And as a result of that, Carney doesn't have any clue where to turn to stimulate the economy, because all of the major jobs that he was relying on are now moving into the United States. I know that the Albertans are talking about, pipelines, and I keep talking about magnetic levitation, because I understand that one of the ways to save the economy is to do massive infrastructure projects. And I can take you all the way back to the Great Depression of the 30s to show it to you. That's a different video. This one, I just want you to concentrate on the idea that they're trying to convince you that the cost of living, the Consumer Price Index, or inflation as we call it, is getting better, but only on gas, and only because they cut out the tax, thus proving Pierre Poilievre to be correct the whole time. By the way, years now, he's been saying it. It's going to improve your standard of living. Of course, Mark Carney putting all of the foolishness, putting it onto businesses to pay for it, putting it onto our food, right? They are charging farmers carbon tax to put carbon into food that helps them grow better. But not the stuff that comes in out of Mexico. Nope. That stuff doesn't have any carbon tax put on it. That's why a tomato grown in Canada is 3 times what it costs to grow in Mexico. Moderating the slowdown in the CPI in April were higher prices for travel and for food prices at 3.8%. You see what I mean? So now all of a sudden inflation on food is nearly 4%, 3.8% in April, and that's in April. Here we are coming into May. By the time they release the May numbers, it'll be near 5. I'm telling you. On a monthly basis, the CPI fell 0.01% in April. On a seasonally adjusted monthly basis, it was down 0.2%. Now, all that means is that it fell 1% versus March, or it fell 0.2% versus last April. Gasoline led the decline in consumer energy prices, falling 18% year over year in April, following a 1.6% decline in March. The price decrease in April was mainly driven by the removal of the consumer price tax. 18%. That's how much we've been taxed over the years by this carbon tax. And all you out there who voted for the Liberal Party screaming that, Maple MAGA or whatever they were talking about with Pierre Poilievre, and here he was just trying to save you 8% of your daily living, and 18% that he wouldn't have transferred over to the industrial carbon tax, and 18% that he would have removed from the farmers as well. He would have removed it from all of the industry. And you right now would be able to go to the store or go to the bar or go to the restaurant, and you would have a considerably smaller amount of money to pay, and you would be able to stimulate the economy, as opposed to the net zero craziness that we got running around this country. The lunatics that the eco-mentalist says it's called, to trying to make everybody pay carbon because somehow we're going to dump all of that money into a volcano and the earth is going to be happy with it. Consumers pay more for groceries in April. In April, prices for food purchases from stores grew at a faster pace, increasing 3.8% year over year compared to the 3.2% in March. So even in March, they went up 3.2%. So if we look at from March to April, the 3.2% increase from just the month prior, or 3.8% from the year prior. Now, I don't want to confuse you, just understand something, that they have gone up consistently since Mark Carney became the leader of the Liberal Party, just like they have always been going up. He has done absolutely nothing to curtail the rising food prices, or curtail the rising property prices, or curtail the rising cost of living in all across this country. Zero. Mr. I'm an economist, and crisis this and crisis that. The largest contributor year over year acceleration in April were fresh vegetables and fresh or frozen beef at 16.2%. That's how much meat went up. Coffee and tea, 13%. Sugar and confectionery, 8%. And other preparations at 3%. Prices for food purchased from restaurants also rose at a faster rate in April, increasing 3.6% year over year, following a 3.2% gain in March. Now, what I'm trying to tell you all there is what I just said. Food prices are going up across the board, and he is doing nothing to stop it. Absolutely nothing. So if I was to just break it down for you, gas prices went down by 18% because he cut the carbon tax, and the cost of everything else went up because he moved the carbon tax onto all of our important stuff like fresh food, beef, and all of the meat imports that he's putting the tariff on, because that's what he wants to do. He believes that you should pay extra to eat, for the right to eat or the right to live. I mean, I don't understand the madness that comes out of this guy, especially when he gets into a caravan of 9 SUVs, and that takes him directly to a private jet, which he flies around the world, convincing himself that he's permitted to, and you are not. He wants to live a quality of living that he doesn't believe you earned or you deserve. And so you must pay more for your food. You must pay more to live. Now, when I think about the government, what I think about is the government giving me a better standard of living, which means that my food should be quality and not expensive, that my house should be quality and not expensive. And this is a philosophy that has followed most of the world, and it is the philosophy that has currently built the Western world. Why this guy wants to come along in the 11th hour and try to change it into some dystopian nightmare so that he can tell the world that he's done something against carbon, while the rest of the world goes to a 20 or 25% increase in their demand for the very oil that Mark Carney is telling you that you have to pay for. You have to pay for whatever gets put on to make your food better. You have to pay for whatever gets put on to make your food fertilized so it'll grow better. You have to put on whatever the tree that is cut down, and the chainsaw, the oil that was in the chainsaw that was used to cut it down, for the wood to build the house, or the nails and the screws to hold it together. All of that you have to pay extra for, because in some way in his mind, he thinks that by draining you of all of your resources, you're going to somehow start to value carbon more. There's a real concern coming here, and this is nothing. This is just the start of it. If we don't get this curtailed, if we don't do something as a country, this is going to get out of control. And I promise you that it's not going to be pretty. All right, let me know what you think. Am I being overly judgmental, or do you see that there's a big problem for Canadians and we have to do something about it? I'm going to wrap here. Thank you for listening. I'll talk to you next time.